I'm sitting here live again from the Noman store inside of the green screen hangar at the Noman School of Visual Effects in Hollywood, California. We are fresh off the foothills of our first presentation for the 2016 ZBrush Summit. I'm Louis Tucci, your host. It's going to be going on for 3 days here underneath the shadow of the Hollywood sign. I'm sitting with none other than my friend at this point, for years we've known each other, Andrew Cawrse. Thank you for sitting with me.
Sure.
Wonderful presentation.
Thank you.
We're just catching up off and on the record. Behind the camera we had a moment ago. Hello, Alex Alvarez. Thanks for stopping by and saying hello. We're just chatting about a few things, but I want to jump back into something you said in the presentation to give the people at home. We'll revert back to times long ago, and then we'll fast forward if it's okay.
Okay, sure.
You mentioned that at the high point of what some people would consider would be the high point of a person's career, you made a very sort of definitive decision to go, in the words of Fleetwood Mac, your own way.
Yeah, that's true.
I want to talk to you about the fear.
That's true.
I want the sort of the internalization of that process, because a lot of people sort of brush through that or it goes over or under them. I want you to slow things down for us and take us back to those days and the sorts of things you were feeling emotionally walking away from what had been the opportunity of a lifetime until then.
Sure. I think if you're scared of the dream you're pursuing, then it's the right dream. Then it's the right. I think the fear is always there. It's just your ability to push through it and maybe trust, your judgment and to follow what you're passionate about. Because if the dream didn't mean anything, then you wouldn't care so much.
Right.
If that makes sense.
So you want to get the flutter.
Yeah. If you weren't sort of nervous about it, then you're not going to grow. You're not aiming high enough to pursue the things that we're not here long enough.
Right. Yeah. No kidding.
And it was a really great conversation with Mr. Cameron. I mean, basically he was telling me his journey, and I wasn't 20 something. I was already in my 30s, and I'm like, if I'm going to pursue things that I'm also personally passionate about, it had to happen. I couldn't wait another 10 years,
Right.
So
that emotional connection is what is basically the fuel that overcomes potentially that sort of bit of fear that is there.
True. And the other way to look at it is it was such an amazing honor and privilege to be put in that situation. And if you realize that it's never going to get better than that. It was an amazing experience.
Right.
And if you realize, well, there's still something missing, then that was also a great education as well, because like you said, it was something that anyone really in our industry would have loved to have had a chance to do. But sometimes then I'm like, well, I should move on and then leave that spot open for people where that is their thing, where that is their dream. So,
that's a real socially responsible kind of approach to that, to say, well, I'm taking up a space here and I'm not operating at the fullest of what I think is... Well, you are operating at the fullest of your potential, but you believe that there's more and further that you could reach for, and so you open up an opportunity for another generation of
artists,
of artists to step in.
Absolutely, yeah.
I think that's a real tremendous sort of statement. I think that's doing something for the love of the pursuit of art, really.
Sure, yeah.
And I think that's really to be commended. I wanted to make sure that they sort of got the gist of that. And then at the same time, I remember some time ago, this isn't our first ride on the pony, of course, people. It's a very comfortable interview for me.
Sure.
Thank you, by the way.
Yeah.
Most people who don't know you, he's a warm gentleman who's always open to have conversations, very approachable, so from day one. We had lunch some years ago, and you mentioned, you're going to think I'm crazy for remembering this, but I do.
Okay.
Is that when you were with Mr. McDonald in the studio, he was instrumental in also facilitating, because people don't just make decisions, don't go home at the end of the day and say, I'm quitting ILM, I'm leaving.
Sure.
This is not, don't get the wrong idea out there. You don't just, to a friend
there is a plan, there is a plan with it.
They're feverishly banging on their keyboards at home, they're like, I quit. No, don't just walk into work and quit, people.
Right.
So you had this very sort of thorough kind of process that you went through. I was mentioning Mr. McDonald and how he had said to you that, and I quote, and now this is the part where you're going to be impressed, jump and the net will appear.
Almost perfect. Leap and the net will appear.
Leap. I'm sorry, leap and God, can we get a mulligan on that one? Cut. Leap and the net will appear. And I've taken that to heart as well, just so you know.
Good. Wonderful.
But tell us about that for you and what that meant for you at the time.
Yeah, for those of you who don't know, Richard McDonald is my mentor, and he's one of the world's most collective figurative sculptors in bronze.
A true master.
Of
the highest caliber.
At the time I was considering, do I quit the effects industry to pursue this and everything else, and also anatomy tools? And he said, just leap and the net will appear. which means that if you have the belief, or now he tells me, which is interesting, now that we're friends and colleagues, he says, actually, there's never a net. You never needed the net. Because I'm looking at the ground rushing up, going,
Yeah, right.
when's the net appearing?
Somebody got a parachute.
But yeah, he's been a great teacher and a great mentor and a great friend. And it's great to hear that that was helpful for you.
It was.
Because at the time it was a huge decision.
Yeah.
I mentioned in the summit that I just asked my wife to marry me. We just bought a house, and then I got rid of my sole source of income to pursue your own company. Yeah. So it was a courageous time.
People think it's crazy. You know, brings us to a very important topic I've been teaching, like I was saying to you off camera, at the Nomen School and some other places for the last year and a half or so. And that was a pursuit that I always had in the background as well. But this brings us to something very important, and it's the topic of complacency. And I think that, you know, from the exterior, watching your trajectory and watching your company's trajectory, what I have always seen is a constant pursuit of the next step or the next phase. You just presented a potential whole new body of works in the realm of the animals. So they're tapping on their keyboards at home and fervor and sort of anxiousness, waiting for the product. Yeah. I think I am as well. Yeah. How can you describe for younger people out there who are potentially in that situation where they've landed the dream gig, you know, many of them coming out of this institution and many others. Yes. What words of wisdom would you give to them, not per se to walk away from these things and pursue their own projects, but to never become complacent? Because I'd like to say I'd like that to be some of my final sort of statements in my life, to say, don't be complacent and be fearless.
I think that most of the colleagues and friends we have here, they just have a true love of their art. Right. And so it's just the passion for what they enjoy. Then they're not complacent. They're always like, again, to quote Richard, he said, every piece is practice, which means like you're just on to the next one, right? You're on to the next one.
Don't marry yourself to those.
Yeah. And I also think that while even at ILM, every 2 years I changed what I did.
Ah, okay.
You know,
you didn't mention that part for the people.
Yeah, meaning that even within a company that was an amazing company, I was always like, oh, that's exciting to me, and then I would pursue that.
And you were given facility to be able to do that.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay,
and I
so
think
that's very important.
If you have the passion and integrity, the doors will open up to you.
Right. Well said. Yeah, passion and integrity, two things that are essential as well in my own sort of approach of things. But the other thing that I want to mention, and that brings us to the topic of process. Okay. You mentioned that the process was something that you were talking about it while you were sculpting a young lady in the background. And I wanted to ask you, you know, it's been said that a true sort of master is going to work through those times when it seems difficult, you know. What words of wisdom would you give to young people trying to sculpt through the mess that is their misunderstandings or their...
Sure. Well, you have two different experiences, I think. You know, you've heard athletes say when you're in the zone.
Right, yeah.
And I think artists, it's wonderful when that happens, when you're just drawing or sculpting and it's just flowing. But other times, you know, you get into trouble or it's not going as well as you want. So you do need a system that you can rely on to get things back on track. Okay. And I think that that's what the professional artist is able to do. At will, almost.
Is to call upon that series of steps or pragmatic approaches.
Yeah, I've got to get this artwork done, and today it's a bit harder for me. So I'm going to go through a repeatable process to get a guaranteed result.
Well, that makes a lot of sense. You know, you sort of every time I speak to this gentleman, I reframe my own sort of reality. It's a real pleasure to be able to do that. But I think that that's really sound advice. And a lot of this is what I've realized as well dealing with students is that sometimes that goes over or under them, and it's important to sort of recompound that kind of message. And I think what we're trying to say is that if you have steps that you can take to break something down, you know, like you were trying to allude to that earlier, you were saying, you know, treat the arm, for instance, as a portrait. Right. Expand on that, perhaps, so that people really get the message.
Well, I think that, you know, people are asking, well, how do I improve the anatomy of my work and all of that? Well, yes, some of it is book knowledge, but the other is just becoming a true observer, which means for some reason because it's complicated, right? You're trying to capture likeness in somebody's portrait. And yet when we then go to the body, we just go from our imagination almost. So we just, you know, and I'm like, well, why? Why not keep that good habit you had trying to capture the portrait do the portrait of the rest of the body, it's their knee, it's not just a knee.
And pay it its just cause or respect.
And even if you don't understand everything, if you become a good observer first and recreate using light, get the shadows and highlights correct, and then as your book knowledge improves, you'll be quicker in getting there and quicker at understanding of what you're actually looking at. So I think it's just having a perspective of saying, I actually have a bad habit as an artist, that I interpret everything. I take a snapshot and then I just do what I think I see, instead of really staying there. And instead of having 20% of the time on your subject and 80% on your art, flip it. While you're learning, do 80% of the study, and then once you understand it, then do your artwork.
To really ingrain that visual representation.
Kind of flip what our habit is. Yeah,
what that is, and
That's
then
right.
take that with you and try to reproduce that in the space.
Yeah, I'm not sure if that makes sense.
No, it makes sense to me.
Okay.
I hope that's making sense at home. If there's any questions, send them in through the old feed, and we'll get back to you on those a little later on.
Okay.
But this brings us continually to this idea of process, and I think that there is something to be said about taking things. You mentioned the books, and there have been countless resources available for many years. I think the power and the strength, this is not a sales pitch at all, this is me speaking strictly as an artist, because I've come to call on your tools, which are featured in the background here prominently.
Oh, yeah, okay.
Yeah, inside the Noman School store. What I think the benefit is to be able to pull an arm off, as I was mentioning, and to be able to look at things in 3 dimensions in that way.
Definitely.
Is something invaluable. I mean,
well, particularly if you're a sculptor in ZBrush, you need
Right.
to understand things volumetrically and dimensionally. So, I think that having a way of accessing or making benefit of all of your reference materials, that's what I was saying in the talk, was you need a simple operating system that you can apply complicated things with.
right.
Right? So we were also talking about, well, then after you've got a basic understanding of the anatomy, then you want to know, well, what's going to happen now when
exactly.
and you want to put gesture and movement and, so you need a simple system to be able to remap everything correctly and then layer that knowledge on top of it.
Probably the biggest challenge, I think, in that sort of upper intermediate to professional level is to be able to really then sort of work. There's a few guys that come to mind who are actually going to be roaming around here all weekend.
Okay, yeah.
Who are masterfully, or who are gifted in that particular regard to capture things in a pose, And I think that there's that struggle.
Yeah, for sure.
I find myself doing that. I was saying this off the camera. I say this on the record. I have no qualms with it at all. There's sometimes where it's just like, you want to have that kind of understanding of the way things are turning. And you were mentioning a sort of solution, maybe the mirror.
Yeah, when I was trying to really learn, the complexity of the forearm, we forget that we're mostly human, right? Meaning that we forget to use ourselves.
After midnight, I can't be held responsible.
That's
I mean,
right.
listen.
It means
Come
that
behind the camera.
we forget to use ourselves. So just having a mirror up somewhere where you can watch what's happening,
Right.
and and you're a good model because you're free.
Yeah, exactly. Much like
Right.
an animator, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. And now it's so easy to use cameras. It's so easy to record things for future study. Don't be afraid to use yourself as a model. Absolutely.
Okay, and
Yeah.
speaking of don't be afraid, what I wanted to talk to you about was your personal work. Now we jump forward in time.
Okay. Yeah.
Towards the end of the presentation that you gave, there was some talk of the last decade or so of personal production. What kind of things drive that work, aside from this? Because let's be frank, before you answer that, I want to be
Sure.
very, very sort of sincere about this in a very kind way. The anatomy stuff is, it's safe to say, scientific observations.
Yeah, it's mostly academic.
Mostly academic fusion of sort of, there is a tremendous artistry that goes into it. But we're talking about your representation of forms and figures in an artistic way that moves away from that,
That's
almost
right.
in a sort of jazz player-esque type of environment, where now you've taken the sheet music and you're starting to rearrange the meaning and the tone of those particular things. Tell us about your personal work and what's
Well,
happening.
I have had many colleagues and friends say, Andrew, when are we going to see your work? And I think that we're in such a generation of instant gratification.
Yes.
Like download, want it now,
I agree with you.
that. For me, the fine art was always a personal experience. And
myself as well.
Yeah, and I wanted it to mature. And now that I think that I'm at that point where, coming up with individual style is very difficult, particularly these days, because as soon as somebody does something that's amazing, it's around the world, everyone's seen it.
Color palettes, tones,
everything.
values.
So for me, it was very important to enjoy the work and enjoy releasing a body of work and not just one or two pieces.
Right, as a collective.
Yeah, as a
piece.
collective, yeah. And the nice thing about running Anatomy Tools and helping people with the academic side, well, that helps give me the resources and financing to then do my artwork,
right,
and not have to be commissioned work.
Right.
So you have every freedom to sculpt or paint whatever you want.
Even more liberty than before.
Yeah, because you're not forced to do it as a means of income.
Yeah, I feel the same way about that, sort of in the background. I think that's, you raise a very interesting social point of reference. I have a couple of bottles of port wine that are, 94-ish vintage.
Just about ready to, yeah.
No, they're not even just about, this is the challenge, right, is to
Right.
say, we don't oftentimes have things in our lives that we have to wait for anymore.
That's right.
And I think I did it consciously as an experiment. I bought these bottles and I said, well, they're not ready and they can't be opened until
a certain
a
maturing.
decade has passed.
Yeah.
So they're already, I've got something that I think is a 30-year-old bottle, and I think it's, at 40 is when they say it starts to really mature and come into its own. So we're closing in, on the gap. But I think there's something to be said about that, and I think there is this instant gratification that people have come to be expectant of.
Yeah.
That is a falsehood,
Yeah, and I think we lose something because most of the artists that I really enjoy their work, my favorite stuff of theirs is around their 40s.
Right.
They've had enough.
You've given me great hope then.
Right? Yeah, there you go. Well, unlike being an athlete where you have that small window,
Yeah. 28 is gone.
Yeah,
right?
yeah, that's
Those
right.
days are finished.
That you've got enough life experience to really bring something to your work.
Not so much the how, but the why.
Yeah, exactly. So yes, there's a whole journey to get the skills you need.
Right.
And there was a gentleman I met who was a marble sculptor for the Vatican.
Oh wow.
His handshake was like like a vice
I
grip.
bet.
But I was describing this thing I'm going through, right? And he said, "Oh, what you're talking about is the 3 H's." I said, "The 3 H's." He said, "Yeah, your work should aspire to have head, right? So in other words, there's some intellect or story behind it, or right? Heart, it stirs your emotion. There's some type of emotional response, and how good your hand is. So in other words, how good are you at your actual art?
Yeah, the actual physical.
Yeah, and it doesn't mean that
task of
it doesn't mean you're creating by formula. I don't mean it that way. I just meant that if you can achieve those 3 intuitively or naturally, then it generally will be a stronger piece of work than just having one of them or a couple of them. So,
Okay.
if that helps.
No, that makes all the sense in the world to me. I'm at the perfect time to be having this conversation with you personally. I hope that the audience is taking. I mean, I feel very greedy and selfish in some ways. I get these guys all to myself.
I forget that. Yeah, everyone's
this-
out there. Yeah.
He says I forget that they're out there. Well, that's a good thing. And the hundreds and hundreds of thousands around the world in 150 countries now know. But the thing for me is that there is this idea of like even also people saying, "Oh, it only took me this long." Well, that's the last thing I think about is how long it took. I mean. That's some kind of falsehood as well. And not to knock anybody, but just my perspective.
Well,
on
there's
it.
a balance because at some point you have to start your art career.
Of course.
And that's I'm also very conscious of that. You can't keep it on the shelf or in the back room forever.
Right.
If it's something you're passionate about, then you do want to share it with the world.
Yeah.
And that hopefully it'll reach other people in a similar way. But again, I know I've quoted Richard quite a bit in this interview,
that's okay.
but that's the influence he has on my life. But he's like, I'm in no hurry to do bad art.
You know what? You tell him from me that I'm very thankful for that kind of commentary.
Right.
I appreciate that. Absolutely.
So meaning that, you pursue it with every passion and it'll never be finished.
Right.
You could always improve it. But at a certain point, it'll reach a level where, you feel like it's ready to release.
Right. Well, listen, on behalf of myself and everybody at the Pixelogic team, on the Pixelogic team, and the people who have gathered here in the congregation, the green screen hangar, the Noman School of Visual Effects, I'd like to thank you for sitting with me.
You're welcome.
And we'll be flexing our muscles. This is Andrew Cawrse from Anatomy Tools, founder and president of Anatomy Tools. You get yours, remember, this is a rare opportunity to sit with a man who has done so much for the community. I'm Louis Tucci on behalf of everybody here inside the ZBrush Summit. This is day 1. Underneath the shadow of the Hollywood sign, there's more to come. Take it back to you in the main room, Paul, and the rest of you folks. Thanks again.
Thank you.